Hey everybody, Ben here from DMC Films and Cinder Studios, and I'm back with another acrylic painting tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to create watercolor effects just with acrylic paint and water. So to start things off, I've got a relatively soft flat brush here that we'll be using for my main brush for this demo. Down on my table here I've got taped down a piece of drawing paper. Keep in mind that drawing paper won't take the water quite as well as a thicker paper such as bristle or watercolor paper, but I'm using it just for this demo because it's relatively cheap. And I'm certainly not going to use my good paper for, something I'm not considering a completed piece. Over on my palette, I'm going to drop a few colors. I'm just going to grab a little bit on my finger here. This is my Cad Yellow Medium, Cadmium Red Hue, and a little bit of Phthalo Blue. Now the two most common techniques in watercolor painting are going to be wet on wet and wet on dry. Wet on wet simply means that you're wetting down the page before you apply any kind of paint. So I'm going to lay a little bit of water down in front of me. And now I'm going to grab a pretty decent amount of water onto my brush and drop that onto the palette. And I'm going to take, we'll go with a little bit of yellow here. Just kind of mix that in ever so slightly to tone the water. And you start to get a little bit of a wash on that paper. Now the more paint you add, the more it'll behave more like watercolor. And simply, that's all you're doing, is you're adding color to water and creating washes. Now because I'm using drawing paper here, you can see that it's already starting to buckle quite a bit. And if you're using drawing paper with a acrylic watercolor technique, you're going to find that it's much better to do wet on dry. So for that, I'm going to grab a little more paint and mix that into my water. And simply come right down there. And you can do just about anything with that to color in the page. Now let's create a red mix. We'll get a little water. And the yellow mix here is about maybe 10% of paint to about 90% water. I'm going to take that ratio up a little bit. And we'll go for, that's about 10% there. I'm going to grab a little more paint. We're going to try and bring that up to about 30% paint. We're just going to go right on the dry again. And you get much more of the brilliant color at that 30 to 70 ratio. But I am noticing that, again, this is drawing paper, but I am noticing that it's absorbing into the paper a little too much. So maybe I should take that up just a little higher to much closer to a 50-50. Look at that nice brilliant color there. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean my brush out, and we're going to go into the blue. And again, we're going to try and turn that into that 50-50 mix. It's getting into the red there, but that's quite alright. We'll come up, we'll go down here, and go some back and forth ways. Now a common thing you see me do in some pieces that I use watercolor is to sprinkle a little water on there to kind of add that little bit of variation. So I think we'll do a little bit of that here. And it creates a little bit of a resist technique. However, because you're using acrylics, you're going to notice that the resist may not be quite the way you want it. And for that, you might want to pick up some, this is Acrylic Flow Release by a company called Golden. Now what you do with flow release is you almost never want to use it in its standard out-of-the-bottle form. It's a highly concentrated formula. And for that, you want to grab a little bit of water and dilute it. What flow release does is essentially breaks the surface tension of water and makes the paint be able to flow into either raw canvas or, in this case, let's say paper. So I'm going to take a couple drops and put that right into my paint. And as you can see, that water really broke and changed. So we're going to mix this into a deep purple since it's already kind of doing that for us. Actually looks a little bit green. and I'm just going to keep layering it back and forth here. Now I'm going to take a little bit of that flow release, take that little dropper and put a few drops of that down as well, just to see what that does. Now as a final thing, I'm going to take all these colors and just sort of swirl them around together, make a nice dark with whatever water I've got left here, just to see what we've got left. So, I'm going to take and do what I think is pretty fun to do with watercolors, or with just acrylics, is to do a little bit of splatter work. I'm just going to tap with the brush. This technique's really good for stars in certain circumstances too. So, since those look a little bit like stars, I'll go ahead and drop in a little hill here. And on the brush here I've got a little bit of paint sitting. And what you can do with that is kind of pull that down and create all these little variations in here. Right about like that. Now let's go ahead and let this dry. Alright, now it's been about 5 minutes, and as you can see, the 10 to 90 mixture, the first one we did, is still very, very wet. It's saturated well into the paper. That's probably going to take a good half hour to dry. The 2080 mixture is almost dry here, and that is much nicer. The one you can see from the 1090 to the 2080 is that there's a little bit more vibrance in this color. The 1090 is a little bit more washed out. The 3070 mix over here, which we used red for, is a little bit wet up here still, but this much is dry. And as you can see, it has that nice sort of mid-tone watercolor effect. And the mix over here we did roughly about 50-50, but the way it's drying it looks more like 40-60. And as you can see with that, the color is much more vibrant as well. Down to our blues, we have the way that the water did less of a resist and more intensified this color. And the flow release kind of created a little bit more of a resist. If you're looking for a more extreme resist, try using rubbing alcohol. And finally, our little mini scene over here. Relatively nice. The drops have their own unique, intense color, but kind of fade out a little bit in the center. So as you can see, even though acrylics aren't necessarily designed to act as watercolors, with just a little bit of water and a little bit of practice, you can get them to do just that. So I hope I've given you a new technique that you can try with your acrylic paints. And as always, for more tips, tutorials, and other videos, subscribe to the channel. This has been from DMC Films and Cinder Studios. See you guys next time.